And welcome on in, everybody, to the Check Your Brain podcast, wherever you are checking this out. It could be on Patreon, which you are getting this on June 30th, the Friday. And if you are, thank you. Thank you, as always, for your patronage. If you're watching for free on YouTube or Rumble or wherever you get this, go to my Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. For as little as $3 a month, you get about 20 to 25 podcasts per month, video, early access to guests and content and everything like that. So yeah, go check it out if you want. If not, then I guess I'll talk to you after this podcast, after next week. Hi, everybody. My name is Tony Mazur with the Check Your Brain podcast. And one of my longtime friends and Patreon supporters is Ken Mosca. He is my guest today. But is he a guest, or is he more so just like a fellow friend and conversationalist about the topics that we're going to discuss today? And there's a reason why I scheduled this podcast to go out today and tomorrow, because there's a huge holiday that is happening in, I don't think it's just the world of sports. I think this should be not only a national, but an international holiday. And that is Bobby Bonilla Day. Bobby Bonilla, former all-star baseball player, pretty good ball player. And he ended up working a deferred contract with the New York Mets, his second time around playing with them. And he gets a little more than $1 million a year every July 1st. So if you're Bobby Bonilla, and we're recording this on June 30th, I'm sure he probably has an update on his phone, a text message that goes out, whatever bank he's using. And as soon as that thing drops in there, and that's however many $1 million that's going to drop in there, he's just waiting. Like you almost think that Bonilla is just sitting there like on his couch, just looking at his phone going, maybe they'll put it in early this time. Maybe it won't be July 1st. Maybe it'll be like the statement goes out July 1st, but really maybe June 30th, it goes in a couple of minutes early. So we'll talk about that and more. But Ken, hey, thanks for doing the podcast here.
Tony, it's great to see you. It's 1.19 million, but who's counting? And I really like your Bedford Recreation Mets shirt there. Very nice. I have my Matt Harvey shirt that I actually bought years ago for my son. The size is a large. Mm-hmm. And you saw me during my illness and my weight loss. It's been 32 pounds.
It's great.
And this large is fitting me. Now, I was 2XL before I got sick. Now, I'm tall. So the 247, 48 pounds I was carrying at 6'2.5" people said I hit it well. But then I look at pictures of me from back then, Tony, and I just we got to get rid of those photos. So, I'm doing well now. I appreciate,
Excellent.
You reaching out the way you did during my illness, and our mutual friend Chad reaching out to me, during that time, and then spending that time with you in good old blueberry capital of the world, Hamilton, New Jersey, was great. And it's great to see it's great to see you today, Tony.
I'll be back on the coast at some point, at some juncture, and maybe I may or may not be wearing this Mets shirt that I have on, that I still have. Again, this is my rec baseball shirt when I was 4. I was just about to enter high school that I got this shirt. Now, this photo, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, that is Anthony Cumia, Greg Opie Hughes, and Jim Norton right after they were on Letterman. So that's why they have the Late Show hooded sweatshirts on. And I thought, here I am going to wear a Mets shirt, because the Mets in 2006 were pretty good for the first time since the Bobby Valentine days. And then Opie was going to go, hey, Tony, hey, oh, great. Hey, well, let's talk after. We'll talk some Mets baseball. And, I'm 18. I'm just about to enter radio. And weirdly enough, about 5 years later, I actually ended up working at this radio station. But not when Opie and Anthony were there, unfortunately. But it didn't work out. And I have other great photos. Of course, I showed this one, the Rich Voss photo.
I'll see Voss next week. No, I'm seeing Florentine next week. He's in town. And Voss is the week after. He's doing my show. And of course,
this doesn't match at all. Look at this jacket and look at the shirt. It doesn't. I'm sorry. It doesn't. I may look dumb with my hair and the long sleeve shirt under the short sleeve shirt at the time, but Voss is just completely clashed.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. And the way he, busts on me, I feel comfortable saying he's got the same stupid look on his face.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's Rich Voss. So yeah, I lucky me, I get to golf with him the week after next, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and he's doing my show on Thursday night. which we we're just about sold out.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Well,
we're just about sold out.
We'll get the plugs out and go from there. But yeah, I contacted you because I know we love talking about like random baseball players, and
Right.
I think what's funny about the team that what they say the worst team that money can buy, which came out in the early 90s, was one of the most unlikable baseball teams I can even think of, which was that Mets team that I'm showing here. And talk to me about, I guess, about like how you felt in 86, and then 87 was a little bit of a down year. They had those wars with the Cardinals back in those days. 88, they came really close, but you had Mike Scioscia, Kirk Gibson, Oral Hershiser. And then they just kept trying to recapture that glory from the 86 years. By 92, you've lost. I mean, Dwight Gooden's not the same player anymore. Strawberry's gone. Gary Carter's retired. Keith Hernandez retired. Mookie Wilson, I guess, ended up playing with Toronto, and Lenny Dykstra was doing a really good job with the Phillies at that time. But so it almost seemed like they were trying to recapture that glory by getting these overpriced free agents like Vince Coleman, Brett Saberhagen, Eddie Murray. And it just was a disaster, wasn't it?
It was. And don't forget Alomar, the second baseman. I can't think of his Sandy's
Robbie
brother.
Alomar.
Robbie, right. Robbie
Alomar. That was in 2002.
Oh, it was 2000. Okay, 2002. But yeah, that was the worst team money can buy. But here we are again today with basically the same thing, the worst team money can buy. The difference is this team is likable. This team has a lot of guys on there that you really do like. Even though they're underperforming, you like them. That team in the early 90s, you didn't like them. A lot of those guys you just didn't like.
Was that Jeff Torborg, the manager?
Torborg was the manager, and I'm trying to
Buddy Harrelson,
who followed him up. Buddy followed him up.
And wasn't Dallas Green, I believe, too.
Yeah, Dallas Green was in there. I thought Green would have lasted longer than he did, but I think like he did with the Yankees, he got himself fired. I think he knew that the what he did in Philadelphia was a one-time thing. That was a one-time thing, and he should have left it at that. But he wanted to get back in the dugout, and it was a disaster. Everywhere he was after Philadelphia in the dugout was a disaster. I mean, he could put a team together, but Dallas Green, he went to Chicago after Philadelphia and built something there, but again, basically run out of town. From there too. But yeah, Bobby Bonilla Day is tomorrow, and 1.19 million direct deposit.
The worst team money could buy, and that was, and the big free agent splash was Bonilla, and that was his first time around. And he had that fight with the sports reporter. I forgot who it was, where he says, "I'll show you the Bronx."
Bob Clappish. Yeah, Bob Clappish was the reporter. Yeah.
And then I think it was Brett Saberhagen sprayed bleach, or it was Vince Coleman threw a firecracker at reporters and fans.
Coleman threw the firecracker. Saberhagen had bleach in a water gun, and our mutual friend right now is calling me on the phone. Our mutual friend. So yeah, so I'll have to let him know I'm podcasting with Tony Mazur right now. But yes, our mutual friend is. I'm sorry, Tony.
Because the thing about with Bonilla at that time, he was a Rule 5. I think he was originally drafted by the Pirates and was a Rule 5 pick. Ended up going to Chicago his rookie season. Then he ends up going back to Chad's calling me now too. And he's and then Bonilla ends up going to the Pirates and having a great MVP caliber type of career. He's well on his way. And it just became pretty evident that the Pirates couldn't keep that team together, whether it was Bonds, Bonilla. They were able to scrounge a little bit for Andy Van Slyke, but I mean, guys like Jeff King, Jay Bell, they didn't have the magic that Bonilla and Bonds did. And you're thinking, well, Bonilla is going to play for this Mets team, and he's going to make this huge splash in the Big Apple, and it just was a disaster.
And it was a disaster. And he argued with the writers, going back at the fans, and that's all before all this social media now. I mean, at the ballparks became. I went and saw the Mets in Philadelphia. I learned a long time ago, don't wear a Mets shirt, don't wear a Mets hat, just go there and watch the game, like I did last Friday night when they lost in Philadelphia. But the fans, at Shea Stadium screaming at him, just screaming at him, and he's screaming back, or he's gesturing back. at them, and there just was no social media, or there were no, iPhones to take photos that people could post. And he was doing all kinds of stuff, back at the fans. But it was a bad mix. That whole period of time was a bad mix. But this whole, Bobby Bonilla day, and this, Tony, he's not the only one.
Oh,
he's
no,
not the only one
we'll
out
get
there.
to that in a second.
Yeah,
but
but
what I found fascinating about the Bonilla thing, if you're watching on the video, I shared the screen from Baseball Reference. His years there, 93 to 95, or well, I'll throw in 92 because 92 wasn't a very good season either. But the rest of them, you're talking about not a bad batting average. I mean, he's averaging 20 something home runs a year. He was a 2-time All-Star during that time. So, but it was the everything else that was the problem. And then yet he ends up going to Baltimore, plays with reacquaints with Jim Leland, wins a World Series in 97 with the Marlins, has that huge trade where he ends up going to play with the Dodgers. Then the Mets get him back. And instead of here's the money, he deferred the contract. Now, I don't know if that was his decision making or whatever the case was, but it obviously was very smart based on what we saw with the, Wilpon and the Bernie Madoff and everything that came out in the late 2000s. But my God, I mean, you look back, and as much as guys like Chris Davis and Pujols and Manny Ramirez and others that we'll talk about here in a second, but it's just, I think what makes this so funny is that a guy like Bonilla, who was a decent player, look at the stats here, decent player, had a great run from 88 to 90, early 90s, yet he still is making money long after he's been retired. He hasn't played a game since 2001.
And look, the Wilpons, they were ahead of the curve, Tony, when it came to these deferred contracts, because as you'll see when we get to some of the other people, those deferred contracts came later on. Wilpons were, give them credit, they were ahead of the game. Give Bonilla credit, for understanding that and taking all that money and deferring it the way he did and not being bought out. Wilpons tried a few times to buy him out, as did early on Steve Cohen, the new Mets owner, bought the team 3 years ago. He's a minority owner, but bought the team 3 years ago. He tried to buy him out, and Bonilla said no. That's when he turned it into. He wanted to turn it into a big Bobby Bonilla day. Tomorrow, Bonilla was supposed to be there with a big fake check, because the direct deposit would have already taken place.
Yeah, like one of those publishers clearinghouse, like Ed McMahon.
And wanted to make a day out of it and celebrate Bonilla. But I don't think Bonilla was up for that. He wasn't up for that. He didn't want any part of that. At least that's the last I read. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow will be a surprise at Citi Field with Bobby Bonilla being there. I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, so here's a couple of the other contracts here that of guys who are making money. So Bonilla makes, a shade over $1 million, a little under $2 million. Chris Davis, this is one of the worst disastrous contracts by the Baltimore Orioles. The fact that the Orioles are actually good this year is shocking. And I think they made, 2 playoff appearances in the last, how many years? I think it was when they fired Davey Johnson after 97. And then they didn't make the playoffs again until 2012, when they had guys like Manny Machado and others. And, Chris Davis had one really good year. He hit 53 home runs, but he's making $14 million. Chris Davis hasn't played a game in how many years? He's not on the team anymore. Yet he makes $15 million a year from the Orioles to sit at home. This is unbelievable.
And Peter Angelos, the owner, who's not really running the club anymore, difficult man, is in his upper 90s, I believe. I'm surprised this contract hasn't killed him already. Seeing these numbers like this compared to the others. But just for a quick, going back to Bonilla just for a second, remember he went to Miami and the Marlins and had a really nice year in 97, and they won the World Series. So he's got a ring from the Marlins, and he was a big contributor there. And he had a much better career than I think than people, gave him credit for. But then you look at the others on here. Look at, Griffey Jr. and John Lester and Manny, and I mean, there's a whole. I knew about Ryan Braun too, and Helton. It's just a whole bunch of guys who did all this. Rafael Devers as well. It's amazing. The Mets broke. They're the ones that broke the mold on this first. And look at all the other teams and players who said, "Hey, I'll defer this money if you want." and they did, because look, there's tax implications here too, Tony.
Yep.
They really reduced their tax implication
I
by
think
doing it that
Griffey
way.
is one of the highest paid right now, one of the highest paid Cincinnati Reds players. Griffey hasn't played with them in 15 years. He hasn't played since 2008 from Cincinnati. Yet Griffey is, I think, one of the top 5 highest paid Cincinnati Reds this year. Although the Reds are actually doing pretty well. They got Ellie De La Cruz, and there's a lot more excitement with the Reds, but it's just hilarious when you look at how much these guys are making. And it's honestly, it's smart in a sport that has no salary cap, that has guaranteed money, that you may as well. I mean, like, okay, yeah, it's not like you're going to be destitute and you're like, well, then I'll be good and I'll be taken care of down the road. It's like, no, they're making great money now, but also they'll be making great money after their retirement. And you wonder if other sports leagues are going to really catch on to this, especially the NFL, that virtually nothing is guaranteed. You're one concussion, you're one leg injury away from
contracts in the NFL.
What's that?
No, I was going to say the guaranteed contracts in the NFL are starting to grow, starting with the quarterbacks, obviously, but they're starting to grow in other areas, especially if you have a great left tackle or a great right tackle, and a Micah Parsons type deal. They're talking about him with deferred money, but you're right. The thing is, with this work in today's Major League Baseball, with the contracts the way they are, can a team like the Pirates, look at some of the smaller market teams that are playing good ball. Look at the Orioles now; they're back as well. But they're only back for a couple of years, and then their players go to the bigger market teams, and they make a lot more money. Can these smaller market teams compete money-wise with the bigger market teams if they're deferring the money for years to come? They're trying to sign. If you've seen, they signed some of their younger guys. Toronto has done this. They've signed some of their younger guys through their early arbitration years. Is that something that can work?
Well, that's when you see these small market teams. How does a team like Kansas City win a championship? How did Kansas City win a World Series? They got them on their rookie contracts. You get guys like Moustakas and Eric Hosmer. You get Alex Gordon had a nice rebounding career, and Lorenzo Cain, they kind of got him from the scrap heap of Milwaukee and were able to do something. If you're a small market team and you win and when I say small market, I'm not even talking about small market. We're not talking Kansas City. We're not necessarily talking about Pittsburgh, but it could be any team that's not LA, New York, or Chicago, and they win a championship. Well, how do the Cardinals do it? Cardinals usually did it because they had guys on some of their best guys were rookie contracts. And I think if you're a Major League Baseball team, you need to really go after those guys who are young and hungry before they get that massive deal. When they get the massive deal, anything goes. So look at Kansas City now. I don't think they finished higher than second to last in their division since they won that championship. But they'll always look back at 2015 and say, hey, guys, remember 2015? Yeah, it was 30 years after the 85 season. It's great. Every 30 years, we'll win a championship. Like, okay, but what about now? Yeah, but 2015. Remember when Wade Davis and Greg Holland and some of those guys, you go, but what about now? What about today's team? And it's like they don't really care. You just keep going back to the well of 2015.
And they don't. And that's it's all about the competition, being able to compete year to year, like the Mets owner is saying, being able to compete year to year. Tony, look what's happening in Oakland. Look what almost happened in Pittsburgh a number of years ago. They were going to relocate. The Twins were going to relocate. Pittsburgh got a new stadium. Twins got a new stadium. Now that they stayed in, they are iconic teams, Pittsburgh and Minnesota. They're iconic.
White Sox almost left a couple of times.
Exactly. But again, the Oakland A's, 3 straight World Series. If they didn't fire Dick Williams and they paid the other guys, they would have won more in a row. Those guys were young. They were winning World Series. We might be talking about the A's as one of the great franchises of the 20th century, but look what's happening. They're going to Vegas. It looks like it's all but done. They're going to Vegas. They're going to build a 33,000 seat stadium. That's all it's going to be. 33. That's all it's going to be.
That's Fenway Park.
That's Fenway Park. That's Wrigley Field, maybe, whatever. It's just the old Jarry Park that Montreal played in. Look, there's going to be more realignment. There has to be. I'm hoping there's no more baseball, like additional teams, I should say. But there should be a team in Montreal I don't want to get off the track here, but this should be good. Montreal's a great baseball town. That's where Jackie Robinson started minor league baseball in Montreal. Oakland, the history of Oakland, it goes on and on, but maybe some of these teams can compete, Tony, the small market teams, by offering these contracts that are considered big deferred payment contracts.
The one thing when I think about these massive contracts that these teams give out, I always look back to about 10 years ago when Robinson Cano leaves the Yankees, goes to Seattle. Seattle hasn't, last year was the first time Seattle's been in the playoffs since 2001.
Yep.
They've been largely irrelevant, even with Ichiro, even bringing back Griffey, even with a couple of decent players they've had, Felix Hernandez. Seattle has just been a sleepy baseball town. They saved it, the 95 team and Edgar Martinez and Alex Rodriguez, they all saved it, but they really haven't done anything with it. So Cano decides instead of competing and making less money, he'll just make more money, get a 10-year deal, and do virtually nothing the rest of his career. He's just largely irrelevant until he gets popped for steroids how many times. What it comes down to is it's wise spending. And if you think that if you're the LA Dodgers or you're the Mets and you just throw a bunch of money at free agents, that you're going to automatically win championships. No, not necessarily. The Mets are a perfect example. The present day Mets are a perfect example of you can't just throw money at a problem and think it's going to fix things. When was the last time the Yankees won a championship? 2009. So that's going on a decade and a half since the vaunted New York Yankees have won a championship. Why? Because whenever free agency comes up, they usually spend a ton of money. Some teams will spend money at the right time and they get the right free agents. It just doesn't work out for some factors. And I think the Mets are dealing with that right now. Or you get teams like the Angels that I'm an Angels fan. And I love the fact of what Ohtani's doing. And I love Mike Trout for how many years, but the Angels are a perfect example of a team that as soon as free agency hits, they pick the wrong free agent. Is that the Mike Trout bat?
There's my Mike Trout bat, 3-time MVP. I got
Millville, New Jersey.
Millville, New Jersey. I got from Mike. He's just a great guy. I'm going to see him August 28th. I'm going to Philadelphia. The Angels are in town, so I'll get a chance to see him. Just to talk about the local great guys we were talking about earlier. Mike Trout's a really a great guy. But
everybody who talks to me about the Angels, they say they like apologize. They're like, what's going on, man? I'm sorry to hear about your Angels. And I'm like, well, here's what it is whenever there's a huge free agent class that is available, they spend money on the wrong guys. 2012 is a perfect example. Free agent, let's get Albert Pujols, let's get CJ Wilson and Josh Hamilton. Pujols was after that. He just did not live up to the standards that he had in St. Louis. CJ Wilson had a good year with the Rangers, and he decides to take the big money. And then Josh Hamilton couldn't stop snorting coke off of girls' chests at a bar on top of a pool table. They did that a couple of years ago with Anthony Rendon. He had one good season with Washington. They threw a ton of money at him. And what has he done since then, other than spend numerous amounts of time on the disabled, or I should say the injured list now? Not allowed to say disabled list. It's just they always but they spend money at the wrong time. So who does it right? Who does it wrong? And I think more times than not, teams that they get a little bit of money and they do it the wrong way. And the Mets are a perfect example of what's going on right now. And they've always done that.
And they have always done that. It's been very few, periods of time. And listen, I'm a longtime Mets fan. Okay. There's been very few periods of time that the Mets really built from within. 69 is one of those years where everything came together. I mean, as an old Mets fan, that's still my team. The 86 team is not my team. I'm a Mets fan, but that 69 team, I was 9 years old. Yeah. That 69 team is my team. I loved the 73 team. I love, I think I've said to you before,
that was with Yogi Berra, right?
Yes. There's 2 games I can't get over. One was a football game, which is Super Bowl V, where the Cowboys lost to the Colts, and Game 6 of the 73 World Series. I can't get over that game. Mets could have, or could have won that World Series. Mian had a ball go under his legs, and Seaver started on short rest and didn't have much. And
how about that catch by Ron Swoboda?
Ron Swoboda. Yeah, that was that was 69.
Mhm.
I actually have a photo of that catch. I think it's used to be up here. It's not up here
It's one of
now.
the great catches of all
I
time.
have the 1970 New York Knicks right here next to me, that championship team. But that's just a great catch. And remember, one run scored. It was I think it was Elrod Hendricks tagged up from third base, or Davy Johnson, I forget who it was, tagged up from third base and
But
scored. But it
what
kept
you're
him from
saying
going to
is,
the wall.
though, you build up an
Yes, yeah.
organization and you spend money at the right time. And when you had a team like the Mets from '86, when Frank Cashin decides that he's going to go in there and say, like, look, we're going to have to gut this. It's not going to be pretty for the next couple of years, but they did it. And that's how they're able to get the Doc Goodens, the Darryl Strawberries. Then they trade for Gary Carter, Keith
Don't
Hernandez.
forget Keith. Don't get. Here's the thing: people look over George Foster. They cut George Foster.
Yep.
During that season, and he was
Lee
angry
Mazzilli.
for Lee Mazzilli, and Foster thought it was a racist thing and stuff like that. But Foster was pretty much spent. But he took Hubie, a young Hubie Brooks under his wing, and the Mets started playing better. 83, 84, 85, all in there. Keith came after that. Keith came in 84, I believe. I'm trying to think of the year, and Keith wasn't going to stay. Frank Cashin talked him into signing an additional, next contract because of what was in the farm. And then they end up trading to get Gary Carter. That's what brought really things together. And 85 they competed well. They didn't win the division. It was no wild card. St. Louis won the division. St. Louis won the World Series. But then 86 came around, and more of the young kids came up, and Doc had his year, and they just steamrolled. But then they snorted their way out of the league, or they snorted their way to the careers that they should have had, and they haven't. But that's one of the deals of being a Mets fan. Just when you think you have it going right, it's like in golf, Tony. You hit a couple of good shots, you say, you know what, I got this figured out. Next thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire, and you're hitting a golf ball all over the place. But that's Mets fans. I think we're used to that. So when we do win, it's a celebration. Look at Atlanta. Not a big market team. Look at the players that they bought out, years of their arbitration. They got their young guys. They lose Freddie Freeman. Who do they bring in? The left-handed first baseman. I'm trying to think of his name, but he's just as good as Freddie Freeman.
Matt Olson.
They brought to supplement. Now I'm just trying. He's the lefty. Lefty. I can't think of his name. First baseman too.
But
and look at their young guys. Yeah, that's what smart teams do. They supplement. The Mets weren't really supplementing. Do they have 4 of their top prospects up right now? Yeah, waiting for Vientos, the 5th one to come up. They're going to bring him up at some point this year. Then what do you do? Well, next year they'll supplement those guys with hopefully, better free agents, and not pitchers that are 39 to 43 years of age.
Well, and that's what's so funny about Bobby Bonilla, why we're talking about his day and why that contract is hilarious, because we're not talking about the Bobby Bonilla from 92 to 95. We're talking about 1999. Mm-hmm. That's that Bobby Bonilla, who was a shadow of his former self. He was nearly eating himself out of the league. He used to be a third baseman. You couldn't put him at third base. You could barely put him in the outfield. The fact that he never went to the American League after that and tried to be a DH to extend his career is insane. Ends up going back to that Mets team that, they were okay. I mean, Oral Hershiser. So they had a bunch of old guys. They had Ricky Henderson on that team. Yeah. They just... I think that was but that was the year they went to the NLCS. I think that was the Robin Ventura Grand Slam single year. And they had a great infield. You had Ray Ordonez, Edgardo Alfonso, John Olerud. I mean, every one of those guys were gold glovers in the infield. But as far as the fringes go, they got Ricky Henderson, who was like 40 years old. They got Bobby Bonilla, who looked like Jabba the Hutt. And it was just a very Mets type of thing. And then you have Bobby Valentine, who was obviously as a head case as everybody knew as a manager.
Great manager, though. Great manager.
Previous podcast guest on the Check Your Brain podcast, Bobby Valentine.
Yep. Yeah. Look, he was a great manager, brilliant baseball mind. And if you read his
ahead of his time.
Oh, absolutely. But if you read his book, you understand where he is, mind frame wise, because he was a great, and I know people throw that word around. He was a great player until he shattered his ankle sliding into second base. It just tore his ankle up. And back then, the surgery or whatever, he was never the same. He could run like a 4.2 40. He could hit. It was over 300. He could defend, gold glove defender, and then he was a shadow of what he was, and that he's never gotten over that. Maybe it's gotten better at times. He's never gotten over that. And when he was managing, and he'd see these ball players who did not have the type of injury that he had or whatever, not putting out everything they had with the opportunity. Yeah, he would be angry, and he'd go off on players. It was legendary, some of the things he would do and say. And but he was one of my favorites. He was a great manager whose baseball career could have been a Hall of Fame player.
Well, how about when they had Mo Vaughn?
Because you hear about the Mo Vaughn signing. Now they signed Mo Vaughn, right?
So I remember Mo Vaughn was he was playing up in Boston. He won an MVP for no reason, and it should have been Albert Bell in '95. Yep. He decides to take the big money, goes to Anaheim, plays with those goofy Angel teams with the softball uniforms, and he plays with the Mets, where, I mean, again, you want to talk about a guy who just was hulking, but he had a lot of power. He hit that ball that almost hit over the right center field scoreboard, but didn't really do too much else with the Mets.
No, I mean, but he was a soldier, a guy that, didn't do too much and took a lot of criticism. Never, I just don't remember him acting out. But how they signed him? If you recall, he had an injury, and the Mets went to see him, and he was in the batting cage. And they watched him hit in the batting cage. He signed that contract when he came out of the batting cage. They offered him the contract, had the deal when he got out of the batting cage. Is that the place where you really want to see him? No, they didn't see him working, around first base and things like that. And when they saw him around first base, they knew as a fielder he was shot, and then when he was up against pitching other than, in the batting cage, he had his moments. Sure, he had his moments, but he was not nearly what they thought they were getting for the amount of money that they were paying him. Typical Mets signing at the time, just one of those deals,
They had to take a couple of years to regroup, and then eventually, when David Wright makes this appearance, he's making barehanded catches over his head, and he ends up becoming the captain of the team. That's where, again, you build an organization, that you're not a team that just decides to go out and spend it, unless you're the Yankees. And by the way, the Yankees of the 2000s, around that Mo Vaughn time, they were it was Steinbrenner trying to recapture that 90s glory. Well, what made the 90s glory for the New York Yankees? Ultimately, it was when Steinbrenner was suspended and banned from baseball. In those times from 90 to 93, that they were able to draft guys like Jeter. They were able to get a look at guys like Posada and Mariano Rivera to bring in to revamp the farm system. Because if it were up to Steinbrenner, I know you know this, if it were up to him, John Elway would have been the right fielder for the Yankees. You would have just had football players out there. You would have had John Elway and Deion Sanders. And eventually, when Steinbrenner got banned from the game because he was following along, had private investigators following Mr. May, Dave Winfield, and he was gone for a couple of years. And that's how they were able to revamp the farm system and get those guys that everybody knows they'll never have to buy a drink in Manhattan again. The problem is when Steinbrenner comes back and wants to continue winning championships and throwing a bunch of money at Randy Johnson, at Carl Pavano, because he had a decent year with the Marlins. Pavano. Like, my God. And that's the way of doing it the wrong way.
And Randy Johnson, another one, is surly son of a bitch too. Remember his first day in New York, the guy had a camera in front of him. Johnson put his hand over the camera and said, get the camera out of my face. Typical Randy Johnson move if you read about him. But yeah, Carl Pavano got run out of town. It was brutal what happened to him. And it was Gene Michael that was Steinbrenner gone. It was Gene Michael and the people he put together that, built those Yankee teams. And, and when George came back, he was still George. I mean, there were still issues with him. There were still firings. And he ended up firing Gene Michael. Don't forget that. I mean, he
Buck Showalter.
Yeah. Look at Buck,
what's Buck doing nowadays?
Yeah, Buck is, it's funny.
Buck Showalter might be fired by the time this podcast comes out, by the way.
Yeah, I think Buck, unless something really goes south, the owner in his press conference yesterday, which I watched, he said no one's getting fired. between now and the end of the year. At the end of the year, we're going to evaluate. Of course we do. Every team evaluates at the end of the year. But, you got Epler. You got Buck. I mean, look, Epler put the team together. People don't like Epler. I think there's other things he could have done. Maybe even with some of the kids, getting some of the kids up here sooner. He did make a nice trade. He traded Escobar on Friday night while I was in Philly. He trades Escobar and gets two young pitchers from the Angels. And the reason why he got better prospects for Escobar, who was doing nothing, was because the Mets agreed to pay more of the salary. So when you pay up on the salary, and you know this, Tony, you're going to get better prospects.
Yep.
That's just the way it works. The Mets were able to get, two better prospects because, the Mets have the funds to, pay up on the contract, and, they got the better prospects. And look, the Mets are going to be sellers. They're 18 games out, 17 games out of first place. And in the wild card, they're 9 games out, something like that, along those lines. It's done. It's over. They might go on a good run. They're not going to catch the Braves. And look, they're not going to catch the wild card. They may get close if they go on a run. They're not catching the Braves. It's just not going to happen.
Have you ever seen this tweet, by the way? So for folks only listening right now,
Sandy Alderson.
Yeah, it says the Draft Nick on Twitter says to Mets GM in August 5th, 2012. It says, "Hey, Sandy, you have to sign this guy. Shohei Ohtani is an 18-year-old in Japan who throws 100 miles an hour. Get him before another team does. # Mets." How about that?
That is amazing. Whoever Michael Parsons, I should follow him on Twitter. I might have to look him up and follow him on Twitter. That's
2012.
That's amazing. 2012. Yeah, 2012.
But this is another example, like, again, getting back to the Angels, because, well, and then now the Angels have Escobar, is once again, some teams just, they get it and other teams they don't. And the reason the Angels they've had a lot of hitting, they have no pitching. They've never had pitching. And in fact, their best pitcher is the guy who's their best hitter too. It's like, I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah. Listen, it's you can't do both. You can't do both. It's never going to work that way. It's a fun novelty right now. It is a fun novelty. Now, I mean, where it worked for the Yankees and Steinbrenner, when they brought Reggie Jackson over, he was one of the bigger free agents that they signed, and had a couple of them on those
from
teams
Baltimore.
There. Yeah, well, he was at Baltimore for a cup of coffee. The A's traded him to Baltimore, and near the end of the season, and the Yankees got him. But Reggie was still a great player. You look at Reggie's numbers from the Baltimore year after the Baltimore years. Reggie was still a great player. You're not getting that on some of this today. When the Mets did it in the early '90s, those guys weren't great players, and even now, Scherzer and Verlander. Verlander won the American League Cy Young Award last year. He's 2-4 with a 5-something ERA now. You just can't plan on that. And the Mets have no other pitching. The young guys they planned on, McGill, Peterson, Quinones, I think, is just about to come back. He got hurt during spring training, a calf strain. That takes a long time. It's just basically July, and he's now coming back. So, it's the luck of the draw sometimes.
So here's a list of guys who played on random teams here. We mentioned about Reggie Jackson playing for Baltimore, which was in the middle of his career. It's not even at the beginning or the end. You get those guys who just play on random teams, like Dave Parker was on the Angels and the Blue Jays at the end of his career. Yeah, Dizzy Dean, Tom Seaver. That was an interesting one, because as much as Seaver didn't really do much with the Red Sox, he was a mentor to Roger Clemens, who I believe he won the MVP and the Cy Young that year.
And he did, and maybe you remember. So Seaver was on the Red Sox during that '86 season.
Yep.
Made inactive for the World Series, and when it appeared in Game 6 that the Red Sox were about to beat the Mets, Buddy Harrelson was the third base coach. He goes out to third base, and Mets back, and Seaver's in a dugout, and they locked eyes, and I don't know if Seaver smiled or did something, but they were close friends. It was a joke. Harrelson flipped him off. Legendary story. Harrelson flipped him off, and of course we know what happened there. Mets make that comeback, and then after being down 3-0 in Game 7, come back and win Game 7, and then that next year, who gets signed by the Mets? Tom Seaver.
Yep.
And he had nothing. He had nothing.
Is done,
And
tapped out.
was
Were you
done.
at the, so my friend Russ Cohen, you've probably heard me talk about it in the podcast. He was at Tom Seaver's 300th win when he was playing with the White Sox
White
at
Sox,
Yankee
yeah.
Stadium.
Yeah.
So how weird is that you're a New York legend and yet, you come back, you win your 300th game across town.
Who called that last? Who called it was on Channel 11. Who called the last inning? The last inning. Seaver went the distance. Who called the last inning? What announcer?
Was it Mel Allen?
No. They brought a classy move by the Yankees. They brought in Lindsey Nelson.
Oh, really? No, I didn't know that.
Who called the last inning. Yeah. Classy move.
Well, I mean, the
Classy
Yankees
move.
were garbage at that time anyway, so you may as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
May as well do something.
Yeah. Classy move. Yeah.
Yeah, Griffey played with the White Sox, which I have a Griffey White Sox shirt just for that purpose because I knew it wasn't going to last, and I bought a shirt at a Champ Sporting Goods. Yeah, the aforementioned Dave Winfield played with the Indians. Do you know the story about Dave Winfield on the Indians?
I do not know. I know the Dave Winfield story when he was at the University of Minnesota. That story, yes. But no, I don't know the Indian story.
Yeah, so Winfield ends up playing with he wins the championship with the Blue Jays, hits that double down the line, wins the World Series, goes to Minnesota where he's from. It gets his 3,000th hit in 1993, plays with them, the Twins in 94. And during the strike that they agreed, because the Twins were going nowhere and the Indians were actually, they had a new stadium and they had a lot of like very good players to play with, thinking that, oh, maybe we can use Dave Winfield for the stretch run. So they traded him to Cleveland. The strike continues and wipes out the whole season. And they realized they never traded Dave Winfield for anybody. So the Indians executives took the Twins executives out to a steak dinner. And that's how the trade was completed. So he was traded for a steak dinner.
I never knew that. Yeah, never knew that. But
and and by the way, he did nothing that year. As much as it was cool having Dave Winfield on that team, he was replaced on the postseason roster by Ruben Amaro Jr. Speaking of Philly legends.
Who later became GM of the Phillies and got back on the field as a first base coach for the Mets briefly. I don't know where he is now. Look at Randy Johnson with Houston. Yeah.
I mean, he should have won the Cy Young that year when he came over from Seattle. Randy Johnson goes to, I think one of his first starts, he struck out like 17 or 18 Pirates. Was unbelievable that year. Although he blew it in the playoffs, he gave up a huge home run to Jim Leyritz, who did nothing in the regular season until October. Jim Leyritz. Gaylord Perry. It was when towards the end. Actually, I believe Gaylord Perry was in the dugout during the Pine Tar game, the George Brett Pine Tar game.
And he was definitely in the dugout. Yes.
And Ricky Henderson had one of those weird careers too, where he played started in Oakland, goes to the Yankees, and though he did well for the Yankees, it was largely forgettable. The Yankees didn't do anything. Ends up going back to Oakland, then plays for Toronto, back to Oakland, plays with San Diego, then goes back to plays with the Angels, back to Oakland. It was all over the place, but one of 29 players to play in 4 decades. Yeah, the aforementioned Eddie Murray played with them. Yeah, I forgot Lee Smith, who should not be in the Hall of Fame. I'm sorry. I'm not a closer guy.
Look at the honorable mention there. Steve Carlton.
Steve Carlton. Yeah.
He had nothing. Absolutely not. He bounced around and had nothing.
Do you remember that when Steve Carlton? So I've playing with the Cardinals and the Phillies for all those years, but he ends up going to the Giants. He played with the Indians, but there was that one brief time where him and Nolan Ryan were going for the strikeout record, and they were kind of just passing each other. Like every starter was, well, Carlton's the strikeout king right now. Nolan Ryan overtook him, and then at that point, Nolan Ryan just continued. He threw a couple more no hitters, and then Carlton was just dead arm.
Yeah, he was dead arm. He was toast, absolutely. But listen, you win 3 Cy Young awards, and he's a great pitcher. He's in the Hall of Fame. But yeah, he bounced around there and really had nothing left.
Yeah, Wade Boggs. I once saw a Tampa Bay Devil Rays game their first year, and Wade Boggs was pinch hitting that game for like like Aaron Ledesma or some random player. And it was weird because I think Fred McGriff was on that team at that time. And then the Indians had Cecil Fielder. They had Doug Jones. It was like a lot of random players. It was an interesting game. I always remember because Wilson Alvarez was pitching for the Devil Rays, and he had a gray glove because it just, I don't know, it matched. And Mike Hargrove, who's the manager of the Indians, comes out and says, that's not a regulation glove. Like, it's not the proper colors. So he needs to change his glove. So it delayed the game. So then the next inning, Bartolo Colon's pitching for the Indians, and Larry Rothschild comes out and says, he's wearing a gray undershirt. He needs to change that. So the game got delayed like 15 minutes total because
I remember
they
that.
didn't have regulation. It was so irritating. But we were at the game watching that. I'm like, what is going on?
Now, I'm pretty sure you'll notice. You remember the nickname given to Mike Hargrove, right?
Oh, yeah, the human rain delay.
Human rain delay. Yeah, he'd get out of the batter's box, lean the bat up against his midsection, and with his gloves and the thumb thing, and just go through all of that stuff.
Can't do that anymore.
And I love the pitch clock, Tony. I love the pitch clock.
I was going to ask about that. Well, what do you think about some of these things? Because you've seen the stolen bases have gone up now. The pitch clock is kind of bringing, I don't want to say it's bringing more people into watching, like actually going to games, but I think the ratings have gone up a little bit.
The ratings have gone up. Like I said, I was in Philadelphia last Friday night in the rain. In the rain. It wasn't terrible rain, but still, it was in the rain. But the game moved along. It stinks sitting in the rain watching the game because they don't really stop games anymore unless it's a huge downpour. But it was moving. It was moving. And the watch, you be at the game to watch and see between innings. The umpire comes out, stands off to the side between home plate and the pitcher, and making sure the pitcher knows you have 3 pitches left, you have 2 pitches left, you have 1 pitch left. Okay, that's it. No more. It's just amazing to see what happens between innings, between at bats. You can see a little bit of it on TV, but when you're at the game now, I sat like right behind basically the Mets dugout, so you had a good view. You could see everything, and just interesting to watch the flow of the game now. It's almost like when we were kids, or sorry, you weren't born yet, when I was a kid, but going back to those periods of time where the games would move along a bit. Steve Carlton and Randy Jones, an hour and 29 minutes one time they pitched a game. But the game's moving along, great, move along really well. With that
I just don't like the stolen base thing. That they made the bases bigger. Okay, that's fine. But I don't like the fact that you can only throw over there a couple of times. And I still hate the runner on second base in extra innings. I can't stand that. I mean, that is
that should go away. It really should go away. And limiting the number of throws to first base, that should go away too. But keep the clock, the clock,
the pitch clock
going.
Yeah, it should count for it then.
Yes, exactly. You should throw over there as many times as you want, but you have to throw the pitch by this period of time. Then maybe bring some more equity into it, Tony. But it's I think that some of the changes they're making are good. I'd like to get rid of that runner at second base. I really would like to do that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous in extra innings, but it's fun because I do look at the stats every so often. I see that I think there's a guy who plays for the A's, has like 40 stolen bases right now.
43. Yeah, it's 43.
Which is incredible because I didn't think we're going to get to a point where people are going to actually, like, you were having people have 38 stolen bases in the past couple of years win the stolen base crown. And a lot of us have said we're probably never going to get to that point where we're going to go back to the Ricky Henderson, Vince Coleman, Tim Raines days where guys are Otis Nixon's having 80 stolen bases. But because of this, the throwing over to first base, and you can only do it a certain amount of times, it's kind of tough. It's tough, but also the catchers are better too. Everybody's kind of taking on this Benito Santiago where they can throw from their knees just a strike to second base.
Trying to think who the catcher was last night who made, the guy got a great jump. The catcher had to go back over the plate up high. And
it was Bo Naylor from the Cleveland, formerly known as the Indians.
Yes, there you go. It's Bo Naylor. Did you see that throw?
I did see it. Yeah.
And the umpire came out from behind home plate to brush off home plate. And you can see the umpire. You can't see his face, but you see the umpire saying something to him and Naylor smiling. So the umpire must have said, "Hey, man, that was a great throw," or whatever he may have said. Well, that was it. Yeah, it was a great throw. Naylor nailed him.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive what we're seeing in baseball nowadays. And we go back into the Bobby Bonilla days and the worst teams money can buy. But and my pinned tweet, of course, which I love, is the I think sports is better in general because when they had Marlboro ads on the scoreboards, and I still
Sure.
believe that to a certain
Yes.
extent. But I will say though, baseball is experiencing a little bit of a resurgence, and I hope it's going to work out, that younger kids are going to rediscover the game instead of just being like, baseball's boring. Do something else.
Well, Tony, that's a great point. And I think, even when they start playoff games or World Series games on the East Coast at 9 o'clock at night, some kids will be able to stay up a little bit longer because the games are moving faster now. They're not going to bed in the second inning, so, and it's 11:30. They'll be able to see more baseball. Even when they're on the East Coast, they're starting these games. They're starting these games later. It's oh, here you go.
Yeah, here's the All-Star ballots right now that we have, and
Rangers have 4 starters, right?
Yeah, and it's incredible because they're not, maybe Corey Seager, but a lot of these guys are not household names.
No, and look at like with DeGrom, he got to Tommy John. Last time I saw it, there were 18 games over 500 when he got to Tommy John, and that was a while ago, a few weeks ago. So I don't know what their record is. I do know they're in first place, I think, still. But without DeGrom, look what the Rangers are doing. They're doing a tremendous job. They were struggling, weren't they, the last few years? More than
what they did was they spent a bunch of money and they didn't do anything. But I think also what didn't help is, the COVID thing, and they planned on their new stadium, or we're going to open it in 2020, and then they could only have a certain amount of games, but then they used it as the neutral site for World Series and everything. But I think they were hoping that, like, we're going to enter this new decade and it's going to be a big thing. But it's finally the Rangers are doing something. It's about time. But yeah, not a ton of household names. And even you go into the National League too here, which is this dude from the Marlins who's been flirting with 400 has been incredible.
He's been fun to watch, Tony. He's been fun to watch,
because it's not just home runs. And that's what's been bothering me about Major League Baseball, is because they care so much about launch angle, and that's what's going to make a lot of money nowadays. And you go, wait a second, just because a guy has 25, 30 home runs at the break, but is hitting 190 is an all-star. It's like in my day, you didn't put, you weren't putting Gorman Thomas or Dave Kingman in the all-star game just because they had 25 home runs at the break. You looked at it like, okay, what if he had 15 home runs, but he was hitting 320? Yeah, then he's an all-star. Yeah. And it's nice to see somebody who can actually hit the ball, put the ball in play, do it what George Brett did in 1980 or John Olerud in 93, where they were hitting well over 400 all the way to September.
And look at JD Martinez, Dodgers designated hitter. Mets looked at him, and I've always been a JD Martinez fan. I know he's in his early 40s, whatever it is. And I think what was happening was they had signed Verlander, they had signed Scherzer. They didn't want to go that route again. But look at what's happening with their designated hitter. It's a wasteland. Vogelback has had his moments. Again, a likable guy. Likable guy. He's not someone you hate, but he's not getting it done. And there's JD, making the All-Star team as a designated hitter. Typical thing that happens to us Mets fans.
Yeah, they want Daniel Vogelbach. They want him to basically be the new Matt Stairs of just they put him as a pinch hitter so that he can hopefully hit a home run.
Yeah, but when Matt Stairs hit him, Matt Stairs hit bombs. Vogelbach,
I loved Matt Stairs just for that reason. He was like the white Manny Mota.
Yeah, Manny Mota. How do you remember Manny Mota? Now
pinch hitting for Pedro Borbon, yes. Manny Mota.
Well, you're going through that old Saturday Night Live
Airplane.
Skit, but Airplane, that's right. Sorry, Airplane. But Manny Mota wasn't a home run hitter. Matt Stairs was. Manny Mota was a left fielder who, I think the biggest hit of his career was that ball he hit off the wall in left field in '78 that Greg Luzinski, who probably should have been out of the game for defensive purposes, couldn't go up and get it. And the Dodgers came back, won that game in Philadelphia to go to the World Series, only to lose to the Yankees. But yeah.
Yeah.
Manny
Well,
Mota.
and then Manny Mota ended up having I think he was he had the most pinch hits ever until Lenny Harris overtook him, who I actually got to see about 2 months ago. He was a first base coach for, I think, the Daytona Tortugas. And I saw him down in Bradenton, but I'm like, hey, it's Lenny Harris. And they had former Met Dick Schofield was a coach for them too.
Yeah. Dick Schofield. He was a shortstop, right?
Yep. He had one of the great plays of all time where in 92, he has a ball that he caught up the middle and threw behind his back to Jeff Kent and was able to nab, I think it was Darren Fletcher, I believe was the hitter for the Montreal Expos. But I love
another unlikable Met, Jeff Kent, who should probably be in the Hall of Fame, but because he just pissed everybody off and the writers and stuff. But again, when you look at Hall of Fame players by position, his stats are, better than a lot of second basemen that are in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Jeff Kent was, who I believe Jeff Kent got traded for David Cohn, I believe, right?
Did get traded for David Cohn. I'm just trying to think of the team, though. Where did Kent go?
Toronto.
It was Toronto.
He came up with Toronto.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm stalling right now because I'm trying to find I'm doing my Jeff Kent story, which isn't an actual Jeff Kent story.
I figure that's what you're doing. I tell you what, one of the guys I want to mention, this is one of the, obscure, abstract things that just come out of nowhere sometimes. R.A. Dickey, who won a Cy Young with the Mets and then signed a free agent contract, I believe, with Toronto. And he never materialized or repeated, I should say, some of the success he had in New York. But you want to talk about a classy guy. R.A. Dickey is one of the classiest guys. He came from a really tough background. Met him a couple times, once in New York, once in Philadelphia, and just had a couple-minute conversation with him. And just a really, really bright guy. I know he writes books now, I believe, or has written some books, and just a really, really good guy.
Yeah, he was. I believe he came out in his said that wasn't he molested by his babysitter or something. It was terrible.
Yep. Yeah.
But I was, man, I'm trying to find this the picture that I have. But so Jeff Kent came up with the Blue Jays in 92. He may have won a ring after the fact, but they traded him for David Cohn. Plays with the Mets. Yeah, you talk about an unlikable player everywhere he went. In 96, he gets traded to the Indians, and it was him and Jose Vizcaino, and got traded for Carlos Baerga. Yeah. And this is my Carlos Baerga stories that my mom, my mom or my grandmother worked at a country club, and they would have the Bell Baerga golf tournament. So Albert Bell, Carlos Baerga, and there would be like a celebrity golf tournament. And Kenny Lofton was my guy growing up, but I loved Albert Bell. And I'm like, it would have been great to meet Albert Bell. He wasn't going to take pictures, especially with this, this 8-year-old white kid and his brother. And so I'm like, all right, whatever. So we see Charles Oakley, and I got a picture of Charles Oakley, which is kind of cool. I think I've shown you that picture. It's 7 foot tall black dude, and here I am, like 4'5".
Oak.
So Carlos Baerga is walking around, and we're like, oh my God, it's Carlos. We're like, Carlos. He comes over, he's like, hey, how's it going? And so we take a picture with him. We go to the 1 hour photo afterward, but we were talking like, oh, we love the 95 Indians team. And, you're one of our favorite players, 200 hits every year, switch hitter, everything. And he was really cool with us, really cool. And somebody's like, hey, Carlos, we need you really quick. And he's like, oh, that's nice meeting you. We're like, all right, that's great. Yeah. So we're going over to a 1 hour photo to get the photo developed. We get in the car and we turn on 3WE over in Cleveland.
Right.
And they said, breaking news, Carlos Baerga has been traded to the New York Mets. And we're like, we just saw him 10 minutes ago. What happened? And that's why he was taken away. And the story was corroborated by Bob DiBiasio, who was he's now the VP but he was like the one of the bigwigs with the Indians at the time. And he's on the golf course with Carlos right on the tee, or like right around, or it was near Carlos, because Carlos is actually talking to us at the time. and the tee box was not far from where he was. And Dan O'Dowd calls Bob DiBiasio and says, "Hey, are you near Carlos?" And he's like, "Yeah, he's like right over here." It's like, "Why?" They're like, "Well, we have some breaking news here." And that was my
and did nothing in New York. Did nothing with the Mets.
He did
he
nothing
was a
after
bust.
that.
Yeah, he was a bust. It appears he was a likable enough guy, but I'd go to Shea Stadium and he he'd get booed and he just was not a
there was a reason
player.
for it. He had a lot of injuries. He came into camp in 96 after the 95 season. He was still injured from the previous year. There were I'm just going to say rumors with him and his party life and everything. Just for just said rumors. That's all I'm saying. Alleged. And that he wasn't the same guy, and that's the reason he got traded. And a lot of people got mad at John Hart, who was the GM of the Indians at the time. And Hart basically came out and says, "I know what I'm doing." And they end up getting Jeff Kent, who ends up being an MVP eventually, but didn't stick around long enough. He only played half a season with the Indians. They trade him for Matt Williams. And Matt Williams ends up having one season, another surly SOB.
Yeah, he was, and it was a terrible manager for the Nationals. Just an absolutely terrible manager. Could not communicate with his players, with the media. It's comical. You go on YouTube and look at some of that stuff with Matt Williams. It was just, comical.
And then Matt Williams ends up playing one season with the Indians, gets traded to the upstart expansion Arizona Diamondbacks, and the Indians get Travis Fryman, who, by all accounts, is a very likable guy. Very good guy.
Yeah, and so Matt Williams, he went to Arizona.
Yep.
And did they beat the Yankees in the World Series? Was he on that team?
Yep.
Yeah, he was on that team and won a ring with that team. Okay.
I think he's the only player to have hit a home run for 3 different World Series teams. Giants in 89, Indians in 97, and Diamondbacks in 2001. It's impressive, but
he was a good. Listen, in his prime, he was a good player. He was a good player.
We could wrap it up here, but I wanted to ask you, because we mentioned about Matt Williams and managers with the Nationals. What were your thoughts on Davey Johnson?
I love Davey. He had few to no rules, and that's what I think made him a successful manager. It's just, remember, Davey was an above average player. Some people call him a good player, very good player. Played on, a World Series winner with Baltimore, made the last out in the 69 World Series, that fly ball to Cleon Jones. I love Davey. Won a World Series in 86, obviously. The drugs tore that team apart, and
when he was a country club manager, he kind of let them do whatever he wanted.
He did. Just play, show up on time, play hard. He's not the only manager to ever have those type of rules. Show up on time, play hard. Joe Torre had those rules too. Let's not kid ourselves with all that. But Davey was an outstanding manager, outstanding player. Won a World Series.
He won everywhere he went.
He won everywhere he went. I think he was shocked to get fired in Baltimore. I'd have to really look up what was going on in Baltimore at the time, because I felt he turned them around. They were playing good ball. He got
fired in Cincinnati, and apparently the reason was because Marge Schott, who was
the dog.
Well, there was the dog thing, but apparently I think the final straw was that Davey Johnson was engaged to a woman and they were living together, and she did not approve of the fact that they were cohabitating before they got married, and said that no matter what happens at the end of the year, you're gone in 95. And he takes him to the NLCS against the Braves that year, gets fired, and they replace him with Ray Knight.
Yeah. Met Ray Knight too. I met Ray Knight a couple of times while he was married to Nancy Lopez. And I think, as you know, I got to be very friendly with Nancy Lopez. She'd come down here and with Val Skinner to this one golf outing that I was involved in for many years. So I got to know her. I got plenty of pictures with her. Really a fabulous lady, and really tough on Ray Knight. She's actually a funny lady, and I got to meet Ray Knight. Talked about the Mets, and I even said to him, boy, did they make a mistake not signing you? Frank Cashin, what a mistake. And he agreed. He
played with Detroit after that, right?
Yeah. He agreed, but he He was the manager of the Reds, I believe, when the umpire died on the field. I'm trying to
John
think of
McSherry.
big John McSherry. That sometimes that's on YouTube. Sometimes it's scrubbed off and it shows up again. But have you ever
It's
seen
like a
that
Faces
full,
of Death thing. Yeah.
yeah, if you ever see the full video where the way he face planted and he was dead before he hit the ground, you read that story. But
And that was opening day against the Expos. I remember that in
yeah,
'96.
and Ray Knight was the manager. Yeah,
Yep.
Ray Knight was
It
the
was it was
manager.
like his first game because Cincinnati
Yeah,
always opens up at home.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Marge shot, they cut to her and she's like, well, great. This is wonderful. Like,
yeah. I know. Yeah,
like she's mad that the umpire died because she had a sellout crowd and the weather was whatever. They barely were able to get the game in because it was like raining and snowing that day. And here we have the opening pitch, and then he just face plants and drops dead. And she's like, poor me.
she was pathetic. Well, you talk about somebody who they couldn't rip that team away from her fast enough.
Oh yeah.
You know, once
And
she
they did a couple of times.
yes, they did. Yes, they did. Just absolutely you know, yeah, she was something else.
But I mean, the Reds haven't been very good since her. So, but
Well, they're back now. Right now, they're playing good ball. I know they won 11 out of 12 recently, and I don't know what really this past week. I don't know what they've done, but up until like Monday or Tuesday this past week, they won 11 out of 12. So
yeah, I mean, they have good players now. They
got
finally
Joey
do.
Votto. Yeah, they finally
Still
got
Votto.
Joey Votto. Joey Votto's back. He's one of my favorite players. One of my favorite players, Joey Votto.
It's funny. I was in Cincinnati last week, and I was right across the river in Covington, Kentucky, and I was at a bar. And it's funny because outside you have all these Reds fans who are watching, and it's weird, by the way, because Cincinnati is one of the few towns that are not a football first town. They're a baseball first town. So I think St. Louis, Detroit, Cincinnati are like the only towns I could think of that's not always football first.
Mm-hmm.
And in Cincinnati, so I'm across the river at this outdoor bar, and Votto's up with two guys on, and they're down by like 1 or 2 runs. And because we're so close on the other side of the river from the stadium, that the fireworks start going off that we hear, and everyone starts getting excited because of the delay on the TV. And then you realize about 7-8 seconds later that Joey Votto hit a 3-run homer to put them in the lead. So it was really cool watching a town that is getting excited for a team, because it's fun when you see some of those towns that you may have a team that may just miss out on a playoff, but they're that hungry that they can't wait to get back next year. Who knows? That could be Cincinnati this year. So it's nice to see in a baseball first town.
Could be, yeah, you're right. Could be Cincinnati this year, and even let's look at the Marlins. I don't know if if Florida is a baseball first town. I believe it's not, because neither.
Oh, it's football. It's football.
Yeah, it's football. Yeah, it's football
baseball
all the way. But I mean, look at the Marlins with what they're doing. With the young players. I mean, this might be their 2, 3, 4 year period that they really make a run at things. And as their players get to arbitration, they can't afford to pay them. I've always said that there really shouldn't be a pro baseball team in Florida, because there really no one is from Florida. People are come from other places.
Yeah,
I mean,
like if you move to Florida, if you move to Florida, you're not going to say like, well, I guess I'm not a Mets fan anymore. No, you're going to be a Mets fan. You're going to see them when they play Tampa or Miami.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. It's I've always said those teams should be contracted or moved. Look, I think there's going to be baseball in Tennessee. I really do.
Herschel Greer Stadium, yeah.
Yeah, there should be baseball in Montreal. There should be. That's a great baseball town, but Florida, they're not great baseball towns. They're just not.
I used to
see them go somewhere else.
I'm kicking myself because for whatever reason, I don't know where the shirt is, but my aunt ended up getting married to a guy who grew up in the Tampa area. And in '92, he got my dad a shirt that says the San Francisco, or the Tampa Bay Giants, a new Bay Area. And it was a great shirt. And because they were in the 11th hour, we're going to move the Giants after the '92 season to Tampa, to I believe it was the Suncoast Dome, which is now Tropicana Field. And at the 11th hour, somebody locally in San Francisco ended up buying the team. But And then they got Barry Bonds, and they had that great season in '93 where with Bill Swift and with God, what's his name? Well, there was Bill Swift, and then there was John Burkett had 20
Right.
wins, and they won
Yeah.
103 games, but they didn't realign the divisions yet, so they won 103, and they missed out on the playoffs.
Missed out on the playoffs.
But think about that: if
Ugh.
them moving the San Francisco Giants to Tampa, it's shocking. But no one else thought the
No.
Cleveland Browns were going to move either, and they did.
Right. Yeah. Listen, the Baltimore Colts, Mayflower trucks that were from this area here. Mayflower was stationed here in this area down to Baltimore and moved down to Indianapolis. But yeah, I'm a traditionalist when it comes to a lot of sports, especially baseball. I want to see baseball in their traditional towns. I get it. There's going to be expansion and all that, but I like to see it. Like I keep saying, I like to see it back in Montreal. I like to see it out of Florida and stay in the traditional areas. And the fact that they're going to leave Oakland, that's a shame.
Sad.
It's very sad. Yeah, very, very sad.
Yeah, and then you see Domingo, was it Domingo Cedeno or no, Domingo Herman. Domingo Cedeno
Herman,
was a former he played with Texas back in like the 90s. Domingo Herman throws perfect game, and no one was around to see it because nobody cares
Yeah.
about the A's. That's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people are going to say that they were at that game?
Yeah.
Oh, I was there, man.
Yeah.
I was at that perfect game. It's like, no, you weren't. There was nobody there. It was like Len
There's nobody
Barker's
there.
perfect game in
Len Barker.
one.
Oh my God.
When Len Barker threw his perfect game, everyone in Cleveland, I think I was there, and I was -7 years old at that time. But everybody happened to, like, oh, I was in section 511 watching that game. It's like, no, you weren't. There was no one at that game. It was 40 degrees and sleet and rain and everything. No one was at that Len Barker game. But you ask anybody, there was 300,000 people at that game.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I know that always seems to happen. It's like the first Super Bowl game wasn't even for first two, maybe weren't even sold out, but to date, 2 million people say they were there.
Of course they were. Well, Ken, we'll wrap it up here. What are the plugs? And again, one of these days I'll be in Atlantic City so I can get a picture with you and the Burt Park statue.
Yeah, the Burt Park statue. I told you before, you guys come up here and we'll take care of everything, get you in Atlantic City, get you a nice place, and we'll have a good time. I have my show Thursday, July 13th. Voss is the headliner with Megan Hanley. She's going to be there. We're just about sold out, Tony. But if there are people, I know you're putting this out today and tomorrow. There's people still want to try to get tickets. It's FACES, FACES, the number 4 autism.com and .org.
And you and your wife have been on this podcast. Talk. Give an elevator pitch for Faces for Autism. Like what do you guys do?
Well, we're in 5 counties down here in South Jersey. We service over 750 families. Now, I say we, but my wife is the executive director. I mean, I'm on the board, obviously, but I got a day job. So I just try to raise money to keep the organization going. We're in our 21st year, about to enter our 21st year. We started it after Kyle was diagnosed. He's 24 now. And it's going strong. Like I said, we help a lot of families. Comedy Night is our biggest fundraiser night. We have other shows that we do, smaller shows, different types of shows, and it keeps the organization going. And we're helping a lot of families. We have a lot of programs for families. We advocate for families. It's becoming harder and harder, especially in the state of New Jersey, to get services for families that have kids on the spectrum. We actually have joined forces with 21 Down because they were struggling again with keeping their organization going. It's just hard, Tony, when and my wife and I are aging out. We don't know who the next generation coming up who's going to take over Faces. We get to it. We finally have a very good exit plan, which I can say the arc of Atlantic County looks like Faces will come under their umbrella someday, which is great. And we just continue to do what we're doing. As I said, it's my wife, it's the board. They're the ones that work it day to day. I just try to raise the money to keep it going. And my love of comedy. So when I took over the comedy stuff, and I'm going to give a shout out to Soul Joel Richardson. We don't work with Joel anymore. What we did for 9 years. He's doing his thing, and he's doing it very, very well. He got us on the map when it comes to comics. I've made friends, as you know, with a lot of comics who I thought should never know my name. Contact me. They have my number. They all want to do my show. It's amazing. some of the things, and I'm sorry, some of the people are contacting me. So I'm going to be doing some more shows. Chad and I have talked about doing something along those lines, but with him in Florida and me here, sometimes it's difficult to do all that. I do have venues here that want me to do shows, but with the work that I do, I'm coming down near the end of the full career, but it's just hard right now to do any more shows than what I'm doing now. But someday I'll be doing more and in different places. But it's all going well, for us. I have no complaints, Tony. We're in the podcast wars, I guess, but so far I think we're unscathed, right?
No, I think so. I think we're adjacent. Me,
Yes.
you, and Earl at this point.
Yeah. And I love this.
We're
I
just
love
hanging
Earl.
out like this on the side with
There
a
you go.
drink and sitting near the
Bartolo,
water.
Big Sexy. There he is, Big Sexy. And Earl. Listen, I love Earl. I'm on his Patreon too, and I'm not part of the wars. Those guys they're big boys. They can handle themselves. I like who I like.
Well, that's why we just keep plugging along here on this podcast and wherever else you can find us and listen to us. And Faces for Autism, and go check out all that Ken and his great organization, and especially with his wife that do. But in the meantime, you'll probably hear him on podcasts such as this. And I thank you for checking out a podcast such as this, which is called the Check Your Brain Podcast. Again, if you enjoyed what you heard, all the random stuff, you'll hear more of that on Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. Just $3 a month. Go check it out. Ken's a subscriber. He listens. Hope you can too. Thanks everybody for checking out today's Check Your Brain podcast. Happy Bobby Bonilla Day to you fine folks. I hope someday you will find a little less than $2 million every July 1st. Have yourselves a good one. And if Bobby Bonilla, if you are listening, just send me a message. I'd love to have you on the podcast. How about that? Let's go, Mets go. Bye now.